The thing about technique and musicality and whatever is, first of all, anybody can define to me what musicality is, okay? Because nobody can. You ask somebody the question, like, what is it? You get a million different answers from a million different people, because nobody knows, and there is no technical definition. There is, however, to technique, yes, it's about command, control of your instrument, and so on. There is no such definition for musicality, and people who sort of compare these two things are comparing bananas and apples. Technique has nothing to do with music or musicality or artistic expression or anything like, or with emotion. Technique is simply a tool. I've said this many times. The more tools you have, the easier it is to build complex structures or simple structures. If you only have a hammer, it'll be hard to build, a house. If you have a hammer and a saw and a jigsaw and a chop saw and you have, a drill and blah, 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 the more tools you have, the easier it is to do certain jobs and do them quickly and efficiently and be able to build a straight wall, not some wonky wall. If you have only a hammer and you have to chop a tree, that won't be a neat cut, That'll be a mess and it'll take forever, And what I'm trying to say is, you must understand, everybody out there, the technique versus musicality and all that kind of stuff is nonsense, because if you look at Bach, Mozart, Schumann, Dvorak, Rachmaninoff, this is unbelievably technical music. Is that non-musical music? No, it's not. Mozart, sure. I want to dare anybody to tell me that Mozart is not musical,
right?
Or Rachmaninoff, it's unbelievably technical, and it's the most amazing music.
Today our guest is the one and only Thomas Lang. Thomas, who's been a Meinl cymbal artist for many years now, never fails to fascinate me when I have the privilege of spending time with him. He has this rare thing about him that I admire so much. This rare thing that only a few people possessed. That thing where he's really good at whatever he does. Drumming? Really good. Remodeling a bathroom? Really good. No kidding. Being a dad and husband to a super cool family? Really good. Maintaining a long and lucrative career within the music industry and within the drum industry through his proverbial river of nickels that he mentions later in the podcast? Really good. Staying in excellent shape? Really good. But at the end of the day, I think that what it comes down to is focus and discipline. Two qualities that are readily available to all, but that too few harness and make work in their favor. Thomas tapped into his inner focus and discipline years ago, and it paid off big time. From being a drummer that does things on the drum set that most people find impossible, to having a happy family and home life, to playing music with all kinds of artists the world over, Thomas is the walking, talking embodiment of how to get shit done. I guess that's what fascinates me about him. Because when you spend time with someone who seems to have all of his or her bases covered like Thomas does, you walk away feeling pumped and energized. I recently was in Los Angeles on some business, and I went to Thomas's house to record this podcast. I had a great time talking with him. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I'd like to welcome everybody into the Meinl Radio podcast. We are at Westlake Village at Thomas Lang's house, upstairs in his studio. Thomas, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for being here.
I'm going to jump right in. I think I've got some cool questions.
Okay.
We're going to take a peek behind the Thomas Lang curtain.
Okay.
All right. So, you may have been, I know you've been asked about this a lot, but I've got to give you one kind of standard question.
Okay.
So some of the artists we've interviewed for this podcast have been formally trained as a musician, having gone to schools such as Berkeley. You, however, went to the Vienna Conservatory of Music in Vienna, Austria, a city that's ground zero for the genius of composers such as Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Brahms, Strauss Sr. and Strauss Jr., and even in a modern-day capacity, tell me how you say his name, Schoenberg?
Schoenberg, yes.
Schoenberg, and Joe Zawinul.
Yes.
So what kind of an impact did your education in such an incredibly rich musical environment have on you overall?
It opened my mind a little bit. I, of course, studied as a drummer and percussionist, both classical and jazz drum set. But having grown up in this very artistic environment with such immense amount of music history all around you all the time, and my parents being classical music fans and performers, they were both in choirs singing classical songs, and everybody I knew was somehow involved in the classical music scene. All the musicians I knew, all the musicians and colleagues I studied with, everybody was not just doing jazz or rock and pop and music or whatever, R&B, modern kind of drum set music, but everybody was also studying, learning and often performing and playing classical music. So I think it just broadened the scope a little bit. That was the main impact. It just, I think, made me consider more options musically and stylistically.
Do you think that the excellence that city has as far as its musical heritage has something to do with the degree of excellence that you bring to your own playing, that you expect of yourself?
In part, absolutely, yes. I mean, Vienna has always had really incredible music schools as a result of so many amazing musicians living and performing and working in Vienna, over centuries. So music education was always a really big thing, and it was a very authoritarian and very strict music education, very much unlike here in the States, for example. But it was government funded and considered a very important part of every child's life. But you had to take it seriously, and they were encouraging excellence. That was a maybe not as fun to study in Vienna, but it was, for me personally, and of course many other factors contribute to me becoming the player and musician I am today, not just schooling, but the overall environment and the overall perception of what music education is, I think, is a little bit different in Vienna because of its history and music history. People take it very seriously, and that kind of filters into your life as a student. You just have a maybe slightly different way of communicating with your teachers and fellow students. From my experience with music schools here in the States, for example, or in other places in Europe, it's slightly different. Slightly, maybe a little more casual and often more focused towards modern music, and more focused maybe towards more contemporary music in general, classical and pop, rock, jazz, etc. But the impact that studying and learning and attending school in Vienna had on me was maybe only 15 to 20% of, I think, what made me as a musician. I think the rest is environment, home environment, support from my parents, being at maybe the right place at the right time, and having all sorts of other things to overcompensate for. I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
But it has a lot to do with many other things. So
Sure.
I honestly think that going to school there wasn't the biggest thing. One of the biggest things for me was my first teacher. He had a huge impact on me. But studying at the conservatory, not as much. Not as much as my first teacher or things that I studied and did by myself.
What was your first teacher's name?
Johann Hengst was his name, and he was a classical percussionist, and he was the chair and percussionist at the Vienna Symphonic Orchestra in Vienna, and he just happened to live and teach in the small town that I grew up in, near Vienna, and he taught me how to practice in the first few weeks of learning with him, and that made a huge difference in my practicing and playing career over the years, because I always practiced with focus and methods and goals in mind and with results in mind as a result of his early education, and that made a huge difference in my career over the years. I think I achieved more in less time than many other colleagues of mine because of the way he taught me in the very beginning.
Yeah, I think I remember reading somewhere where you said, don't play while you practice and don't practice while you play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did that come from Johann?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to shift entirely.
Okay.
We're going to jump to another spot in the Thomas Lang timeline that has nothing to do with drumming, I think.
Great.
We were sitting in a restaurant in the town square in Neustadt an der Aisch before a Meinl Drum Festival. Just you and I. We were having some drinks and some food. And you told me that at one point you served in the Austrian military during the Bosnian War. Mm-hmm. Is this correct?
Yeah.
Really?
Want to see some pictures?
Can you tell us anything about that experience? Was it just like this time suck that took you away from your goals in life, and you just it was like compulsory and you had to do it?
Yeah, that's
Really?
exactly what it was.
So you were somewhere pursuing your goals and you got called back to do this?
Yeah.
And how long was that for?
14 months.
Ugh.
Yeah, a year and 2 months. Yeah, that was okay. I think we have time for this. Okay,
Okay.
I'll show it to the camera too, because this is quite hilarious. This was in 1989 or something, I guess, and or yeah, it must have been like 89. That's 90 exactly. That's when the war happened in Yugoslavia, and of course Austria, having a border with Yugoslavia, became the closest place anybody could go, both refugees and asylum seekers and war criminals. So I was in the army at the time, collecting people at the border and protecting the border and patrolling, and also working with K4 and the UN forces. And I'll show you some pictures.
What is K4?
It was the UN unit stationed in Yugoslavia.
So current day events must ring a little bit, hits close to home, I guess. With the borders and asylum seekers. Wow. So for the people that are only listening to this podcast, Thomas just showed me a picture of him in his army greens.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Wow. Now we're looking at him in his cadet cap.
Oh yeah, look at that.
So you couldn't get out of it fast enough once you were in it, probably.
Exactly. It was very cold.
Wow. And you never played the drums while you were...
No, never.
So when you came back from military service after that, was it tough to blow off the dust?
No, that was really easy.
Okay.
It was tough. Being a rock star, traveling the world, having #1 hits in the US, and being, successful in what I wanted to do and was passionate for, and suddenly being taken from that and transported into this alternate universe that was the military and war. It was very different. It was very yin and yang.
Yeah, sure.
It really grounded me at a point in my life where everything was happening and everything was, taking off.
When you say grounded, you don't mean like made me a better person. More like it just stopped everything.
It stopped everything, and I think eventually it made me a better person. Yeah, because I think I could have easily been lured into a different state of mind, considering the circumstances I was in as a musician, being very successful and touring all over the world at a very young age. I was like 18.
So you got some perspective on what's really important.
Yeah, and I entered the music scene at the very, very top with #1 hits in America. That was my literal. I mean, I'd worked with artists before nationally in Austria and around Europe in German-speaking territories with successful artists. When I was a teenager. Some of the records I played on and artists I worked with from Vienna happened to have #1 hits, and I was 16, 17, 18 years old playing on gold records and touring and so on, during holidays, school holidays and so on. But once I finished school and conservatory, I went on the road, and we were with Falco, and we were playing all over the place. It was very successful. And I was making money, and at that age, you're easily sort of brainwashed, into believing that this is now the new reality. It'll go on forever, and this is just my life now. So having to go to the army in the middle of that, at the beginning of that, was quite a reality check,
Interesting.
So, and not being able to play. And being in dangerous situations sometimes, and just seeing the reality of war and the effect it has, on a country, on people, and relationships, was really, it was a steep learning curve, and also I think a very important reminder that music isn't everything, career isn't everything. Money isn't everything, and there are more important things than any of this, than a flammadiddle, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting to hear. That it makes sense because despite your accomplishments, I've always gotten the vibe from you that you're a much more well-rounded person than people who don't even come close to your level of skill and accomplishments, yet they just put their whole life into it and they have nothing outside of that. So
Right.
You seem much more well-rounded. Golf, family,
It's important.
travel. Yeah.
You know, it's yin and yang makes the Tao. You have to have, I think, you know, you draw from personal experiences to be an inspired musician, and you draw from hard times. You know, if you've never had or seen the bottom, you can't appreciate the top. You know, and if you've never worked hard or under difficult circumstances to get what you want, then I don't think you really cherish it, and you don't really value it as much. And I think if you do, then you work with, you know, a deeper passion and with more consideration for and appreciation for what you're able and allowed to do. You know, so I think, you know, that year and something at the time with the military, I think reminded me that what I really wanted to do is play music and play drums and write music and produce music, and I think to this day, every day, I appreciate and enjoy what I can do, you know, much more as a result. You know, if you know, this unspoiled me in a big way, and it lasts to this day. You know, many decades later. Every day, you know, when I get up and I work and I track something in my own studio or in my other studio, and there's a helicopter. Okay, I remember those sounds.
Yeah, here we are. Yeah.
But you know, every day it just reminds me that, you know, this is amazing, and I feel very blessed and happy that I can indulge in my passion and was able to turn it into my job and profession, and
Sure.
I can do this every day because. There was a time when it was not like that, and there are many people out there who have the same dreams and aspirations, but they can't simply because of the circumstances. So, you know, I'm very grateful for being able to do this, and that period of time was a reminder.
So moving on, your career has taken you from Austria to London. You spent 14 years there, to Los Angeles. What key events happened for you while in London, and also what eventually prompted your move to Los Angeles, and how have you found life here to be both personally and professional?
Okay. Well, key events in London. I moved to London because I grew up in Austria, of course, where we didn't really have much international music when I was a kid, and we had no. You know, music on. There's one show, live music on television every Saturday at 7 p.m. for half an hour or something like that. And I was really exposed to much international music, only local stuff. And yes, it was all influenced by American and U.S. music. But I really, as soon as I was able to buy my own records and whatever, I was totally attracted by England and English-speaking music overall, and I bought all my Deep Purple and, you know, Police and Billy Cobham records, and that's the music I wanted to play. So when I was able to leave Austria, I went to a place where I thought I could work more internationally and work in the English music scene. And the closest to Austria, of course, was England. It was still Europe, and, you know, I didn't feel like I was completely detached then. I actually came here first for a little while and looked around LA and didn't love it at first, and then went back to London and lived there for 14 years. And it had a big impact on me because I went from, yes, we were touring globally also with Falco, but it was German language music, you know, so you were very limited to certain territories, and I knew it was a lucky, you know, hit, and it wasn't going to be anything that was going to be globally successful forever, because, you know, Hans Falco didn't want to sing in English. You know, he wanted to, you know, sing in German, and that would cater only to a limited territory in Europe. But I wanted to work more internationally, and also with different artists and different styles of music. So moving to England allowed for that to happen, and I started working with John Wetton right away.
From Asia.
From Asia, yes, and played with Asia and John for many years, and through John and through working with him, met a lot of other musicians and big names in the progressive rock world in England, with Steve Hackett and Phil Manzanera and Brian Ferry and all those guys, and was able to work with them. And Jack Bruce and Alan Holdsworth and all these players that came and played with us, with John, either with Asia or with John Wetton's solo project, and that was I was a huge fan of King Crimson and the Family and Asia and all those bands. So that was a really great experience for me, and I made a lot of connections through that whole thing. Some of the musicians I work with John, like Billy Lees again, or John Young, or other guys, worked with other bands. So I quickly sort of established myself in the English scene, and then after I had a lot of pop playing experience through Falco and many other European, like continental European acts before, so I was able to use my expertise and experience with that to then also work with a lot of British pop bands. And throughout all of the 90s, basically, I worked with a lot of big British, at the time, British pop acts, and toured internationally everywhere. Did a lot of albums, and that was had a big impact on my career, and it taught me many things. I was able for maybe 15-20 years to have that real stadium kind of young bubblegum pop experience, which was great, and I enjoyed that very much. But it also eventually drove me towards something a little different, away from music that's just too commercial, that's too manufactured, and that is maybe not as creative as I think it could potentially be, and drove me more towards finding my own niche and doing my own thing.
And so you eventually came here to LA.
Yeah, and we then moved here. I met my wife, we got married, and we had kids. They were born in London, but we also had a place here already at the time because my wife lived here and I lived in London at the time. So we were commuting between LA and London for a little while, and it just became too hard with the kids, and we decided we're going to go and live and settle in the place that is more kid-friendly. So it wasn't really a career decision at all. It was more like a lifestyle decision. And I had been in London for 14 years and grown a little tired of the weather, for example, amongst other things. There were a lot of changes in London at the time. The government was changing. It was New Labour in '97, I believe, and there were a lot of things happening that I didn't love. As much as I loved London when I first moved there, it was really hip, super creative. It was all drum and bass and jungle and Britpop was happening, and it was a really exciting time. But then it changed, and it all moved towards pop idol and manufactured bands and so on for a number of years. Now it's different again, but at the time it just wasn't a super inspiring environment, and I felt like it'd be time to move and start from scratch somewhere else, like LA. It has a great music scene, and it had all the things I wanted for myself and my family, which was, great kid-friendly environment, great weather, nature, and infrastructure for music and media. Hollywood, it's the make of the entertainment industry, so it had the best of both worlds. So it was, and my wife, always enjoyed living here. So we said, well, let's pack up and go. And I sold everything in London and we moved here.
So when I lived in LA, and I did for years, I remember always having to hustle to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. Always playing gigs, and funny enough, at that time, usually that's what yielded the least money, but I did that. Mm-hmm. I would drum tech live, I would go in and do studio tuning for engineers I knew. Right. Production work, on and on. Hustling in this town, it's just one of those things you have to do if you don't have a regular job.
Right.
I see you're always on the go, especially with your Thomas Lang boot camps that happen worldwide, mm-hmm. with the Big Drum Bonanza that you do. Mm-hmm. To me, this is like how I see your version of the hustle. Mm-hmm. which I think in essence is just simply being a professional musician.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have to do when you don't have like what people deem a regular job.
Right.
What are some of your other musical endeavors that people maybe don't know about or see that you're involved in to make ends meet and thrive as a musician in the city?
Well, I just want to say I do have a full-time job. You know, that's the thing.
Not a full-time job, what people call a regular job.
Well,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The suit and tie guy that shows up 9
but to
to
me,
5.
this is kind of a regular job. This is my job, and I know there are many people who do exactly what I do, exactly the same way I do it. I think maybe that stigma or cliche associated with, you know, that perception that a musician's job is not a regular job, or you know, simply because you're not always employed. My approach was always, if I'm not employed by somebody else, I employ myself, you know, and this is what I do. So I do, and I always did have a job. I was never out of work as a musician. Even if I wasn't employed by somebody else for a gig or tour or an album, when that wasn't happening, I employed myself. So, and it's simply, I think, as a result of growing up in a family of entrepreneurs, you know. My father was always independent. You know, he never answered to anybody. He always had his own business, and so did my mother. And when there wasn't any work, or he wasn't employed, you know, or hired to do something by somebody else, he would employ himself and hire himself, basically, and create something out of nothing. And this is ultimately the essence of what a creative person or a musician or artist does. When there's nothing, you create something at every level, artistically and business-wise. This is what we do. We're creative people. When there's no work, we create work. You know, if you're just simply only focused on the artistic side, saying if there's no art, I must create art, great, you know, but that doesn't make ends meet. So I was lucky to grow up in an environment where this was also the foundation and principle for, you know, being successful in your business, creating work. It's also a creation. It's also a creative process. The things that I do, apart from play the drums, you know, I'm not a hustler. I hate to hustle. Hustling is not for me.
I'm using all the wrong words here, I guess.
No, I mean, that's what it is, and I see a lot of people hustle, but it just goes completely against my grain and my character. I don't like to hustle. You know, things happen organically with me and other musicians, and with me and other writers or other business partners. It just happens, you know, when it's meant to happen, and that's all good. I never felt I wanted to hustle for work or kind of sell myself in any way, you know, to get some gig at some place, you know, that really means nothing. And yeah, maybe you'll meet somebody, but I always meet people in other ways without having to hustle. And I'm not saying it's bad to hustle. If that's what you want to do and it works for you, great. I know it works for many people, but I'm just not a hustler. I do it in a different way. And maybe it's also a hustle, but it's a different hustle. You know, I was always independent. I always wrote music. I always produced music. I co-produced with other people, and I always had, for many years now, many decades, sort of my educational projects, my solo albums, the bands that I produced, the artists I write for, publishing deals, you know, signature product deals, and so on. So I have what I call the river of nickels flowing, okay, through my life, and this is how I know I make ends meet. I work in every possible aspect of the music or entertainment industry. I write music, and I've always written music. Also, when I first started writing, and when I was studying music, I was, you know, when the first Atari, you know, whatever, what was called Mega ST or whatever I had, I can't remember. When there was, you know, affordable composition software, I had a computer and wrote music. And, you know, I learned to play piano and bass and other instruments in school, so I was able to write. And I always had my fingers in the publishing pie somehow with most of the acts and people I worked with. So there was always that publishing component to make ends meet, and royalties. And to this day, that's, you know, a big chunk of my income, you know. And Then I have, of course, my live playing, concerts, touring, and session income, and I have my online schools, I have my camps, I have my books and DVDs, and royalties and publishing from signature products, and movie soundtracks or station IDs, and things that I produce in the world of film and television. And then co-writing with people and publishing from that, and it all kind of contributes, and completes the pie, if you like,
Well, so it almost sounds like there's never been a time when you've technically been what someone would call unemployed.
Yeah.
But it was interesting what you said. If there wasn't work, you created work.
Mm-hmm.
What's one example of work you created that was incredibly gratifying, that you really enjoyed when you created something out of nothing?
Well, my solo records always, and everything I did as under my own name or under Tom Lang. I released several records. When I released my first solo album, I mean, there was no solo album before, and I decided at one point that maybe this is something I should try, and I felt the urge to release some music. And when I saw that, and I went through the process, and it was actually released, and it did well. Actually, it did have some hits on it and everything in Europe in the 90s, and I had Falco as a guest singer on tracks, and some other known artists, and I saw that you can make it happen. And yes, maybe the reward's a little bit delayed, both in terms of accolades and financial returns, but it's happening. That's a very gratifying experience. So that inspired me to do more of that, and I've since then released many solo records, not all under my own name, but also with my bands like Stork. We did a few records, or Yuma Flex, or many other under my own name, and other project names. And that's always very gratifying. And you create a baby, and there it is. You raise it, and then you introduce it to the world and see how it grows up. And sometimes with musical projects it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's always a learning experience. And artistically, which is the more important thing for me, it's always a wonderful experience, no matter whether it sells or not, or whether you write a hit or not, or anybody likes it or not. This to me is secondary. But these are all very gratifying experiences. And even in the educational, on the educational side, I've had many wonderful experiences with releasing educational material that is revered and respected and inspires other people. This to me is, for example, super gratifying. When I do something like my DVDs or books or online schools, that changes people's lives. If I can give somebody advice, not just in regards to technique or music or kind of drumming instruction, but also in terms of their careers, or maybe the way they look at things, and maybe I can shed some light on people's perception of the music industry, and it affects their lives positively. This to me is one of the most gratifying things ever. And I've had incredible reactions from students and campers and online students, or just people that I had private lessons with or conversations with, who years later, will send me emails and say, dude, that one conversation we had completely changed my life. And I get them regularly, which is amazing, So that to me is a really wonderful thing, and makes it all worthwhile. That alone is fantastic. If you can touch somebody in a positive way and affect their lives positively, and if you see the change and the contrast between where they were when you first met them and had that conversation, and where they are now and what they've achieved and how they've improved their life. I'm not, Tony Robbins or anything like that. But, it's an incredible experience, very rewarding and gratifying, and so those are the moments I remember.
That's cool. So this ties in with my next question in a way, regarding positivity. Mm-hmm. So during your time in London, you worked with an incredible variety of musicians and artists, many of them having, I'm sure, or at least some of them, having some incredible egos. I remember being simply the drum tech on some really high-profile tours, and even I, as the drum tech, was not immune to the challenges of working for an artist who had an ego.
Right.
So for the aspiring musician who wants to be professional at some point in his life, what are some lessons you learned that you can parlay into advice as far as how to handle that aspect of being a hired gun? Where you deal with the incredible ego?
You know, this hired gun thing is such a cliche too. You know, when I hire musicians, I don't hire, the amazing gunslinger. I hire people, human beings who happen to play whatever bass or keyboard, whatever I just happen to need. And, I personally will always go for the person that I find more attractive and I have a better connection with. And that person is always the person who's honest, genuine, who is direct and has no ego, of course. And, I know a lot of session musicians and hired guns, quote unquote, who change as a person when they're working with somebody, just to appeal to them more or to
When you say
hustle.
change, and I'm sorry to interrupt, when you say change, do you mean compromise themselves?
Absolutely, I think so. And act, and they're not truly who they are. They change with different environments. And I've seen session musicians be the goofball in this environment and be the tough guy in that environment. Just simply play a role. And this was never my thing. And if you look at the history of music and great collaborations of musicians or artists with quote unquote hired guns, these were all great relationships between human people who were genuine, honest, direct, never phony, and wouldn't compromise. Not themselves in terms of personality and character, and not musically either. And I think those are the best collaborations, and my recommendation to anybody out there is don't act, don't change and try to adapt to this environment because you think you'd be more appealing or anything. Just be who you are, be honest, be direct, be genuine, and say what you feel and how you like to be working with people and what works for you as much as for them. Of course you have to make compromises in terms of exchanging ideas and whatever financially, but don't change, don't wear the R&B hat and then wear the jazz hat and then wear the metal hat and whatever. I personally, I wouldn't want to work with anybody like that. I want to work with people who are simply who they are all the time. This is the person I know and I like. This is the same person on stage as he is on the bus or at catering or in the hotel bar or when he's visiting me in my home or when I'm on a hiking trip with him, Me, personally. That's just a personal preference.
Okay, so let's say that you have a guy like that who's that type of dude, and he is the touring drummer or touring guitar player for this star. And that star is an asshole. Mm-hmm. Your recommendation would be, hey man, stick to your guns personally, be who you are, and if you get fired from the gig, it wasn't meant to be anyway. And you're all the better for not compromising yourself. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with difficult people before, and if you are a genuine person, then anybody who's an asshole around you or acting erratically or is on drugs or whatever, you just deal with it the way you would deal with anybody else, who's like that and acts like that, whether he's your employer or not. You can't just, and you will receive a whole different level of respect in these situations too if you just are who you are and speak your mind. And it doesn't mean that you have to be aggressive or offensive in any kind of way, but you have to have a true moral north, and say like, no, this is not right. Whether you are paying my check this week or not, this is wrong, and a lot of people I see make very questionable decisions and compromises simply because they just don't want to lose the gig or that week's paycheck or the perks that come with the gig or whatever, or the travel, the work is crap and the money is shit and the employer is an asshole, but hey, I get to see the world. Okay, cool, whatever works for you. It never worked for me. And I've been in situations like that in the early days of my career. Often, was unsure and misled, and also acted, in these situations. And I am a musician, not an actor. I don't want to act around people I work with, and I want to be creative with and communicate with artistically. Acting is for TV and film. It's not for, backstage and on the bus. So, and I was in those situations before where it was, 2 weeks into a tour somewhere in Tokyo, where you just don't want to be around anybody in the band or your employer, because they're a total dick, and you've got another 3 months to go, and you go, damn, I went for this simply because I thought, the money was good. And you learn to make decisions. There's always 3 things that have to be good, or at least 2 out of 3. There's money, there's music, and there's people and chemistry. If the music is great and you love it, then you're happy to compromise, in regards to the finances or money, or even with people. If you sometimes you work with some legend who is quirky and weird, but you're like, it doesn't matter, the music is so amazing. Sometimes the money is just so great that you're like, I don't care about the music at all, or the people. I'm just doing this for the paycheck. Best scenario is always amazing people. If you have a great time with the people and great chemistry, you're happy to compromise money. And you know what? Even if the music is a little crap or cheesy or whatever it is, if you're having a great time with the people on the road and in the studio, I'm happy to compromise, also musically. To me, the relationships with the people are always more important. And I get a lot of questions from people, why did you play on this record? Or why did you do this? Or why do you play that style of music? It's like, because sometimes it's not as important as the relationship with the person that I write this song with, or had the session with, or went on tour with. You should have experienced the dinners we had and the laughs and the amazing things we did and saw. Then you'd understand. It's not always about the music,
So moving on here, this comes from an 8-year-old interview in Drum Magazine.
Okay. Wow.
And I hope the interviewer quoted you accurately, because this is what I'm going off of.
Okay.
You said, quote, "The drum thing has been more of a hindrance in my real job as a musician than a benefit. Often I've heard it, even recently, where people say to me, 'You're Thomas Lang? You're like the drummer's drummer guy, aren't you?' And I'm like, yeah. And they say to me, literal quote, 'Listen, we need more bodies on stage and less faces.' And it's hard at that point to say, 'No, I'm not that guy.'" Unquote. I know that you've always touted what you've taught on DVDs and in your drum camps and clinics as nothing more than tools for control, to enable a drummer to then create art. But my question is, if after having spent so much time at that point in your life, your day-to-day life, working on preparing the technical material for those massive DVD offerings, and having spent so much time teaching and going over technical material, has it ever been hard to separate that technical sound from your playing when the time comes where an artist needs it to sound maybe not so technical? Has that
No,
been
it's
difficult?
never been difficult. No, absolutely not. It's become easier. Yeah. This is... And yes, that quote is absolutely true. And
Okay, good.
quoted perfectly. That was said to my face, which I thought was actually quite funny. But to answer your question, I'll give you the root answer first.
Please.
Okay. The people with a small dick always say that, it doesn't matter how big a dick is, it's all about technique, right?
Right.
Exactly. So that's the thing. I get so many questions about technique versus musicality, or, which is such a nonsense question. The people who always ask that question obviously have no technique. Okay, so you got the small dick, not me.
Wait, are you referring to me with
No,
the
no,
small
not
dick?
you. Like the person who's asking me this question, like, why are you asking this stupid question?
So you were thinking that when this guy asked you this question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you see, people they just don't get it. And it's funny, because, on paper, all the drum nerds, which I'm a nerd as well, who are online and whatever, and all the fans of mine who buy the DVDs or books, they're looking at an instructional DVD and judging it as if it were some sort of artistic offering. It's not. It's an instructional DVD.
Right.
It's about It's about technique, and they look at these things. And I've sort of been labeled with this image of this ultra technical player in everything that I do, simply because a lot of my fans know me only from the instructional product. So of course everything they've seen is technique instruction, and they never put it in context. They look at this as a very isolated thing, and you become labeled as that, because once you've had a bubblegum dance hit, you'll be bubblegum dance person forever. And I've had success with very technical instructional videos in the world of drumming. So that's the one and first association that people have with my style of playing is it's technical. It's very technical. He's the technique guy. Which, yeah, I am.
And I've heard you play straight 2/4 rock before.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
This is my day job. This is what I do all day long.
Right.
And I can do more than that, or less. I can choose because I have all these tools. The thing about technique and musicality and whatever is, first of all, anybody can define to me what musicality is, okay? Because nobody can. You ask somebody the question, like, what is it? You get a million different answers from a million different people because nobody knows, and there is no technical definition. There is, however, to technique. Yes, it's about command, control of your instrument, and so on. There is no such definition for musicality, and people who sort of compare these two things are comparing bananas and apples. Technique has nothing to do with music or musicality or artistic expression or anything like that, or with emotion. Technique is simply a tool. I've said this many times. The more tools you have, the easier it is to build complex structures or simple structures. If you only have a hammer, it'll be hard to build, a house. If you have a hammer and a saw and a jigsaw and a chop saw and you have, a drill and blah, 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 the more tools you have, the easier it is to do certain jobs and do them quickly and efficiently and be able to build a straight wall, not some wonky wall. If you have only a hammer and you have to chop a tree, that won't be a neat cut, That'll be a mess and it'll take forever, And what I'm trying to say is, you must understand, everybody out there, the technique versus musicality and all that kind of stuff is nonsense, because if you look at Bach, Mozart, Schumann, Dvorak, Rachmaninoff, this is unbelievably technical music. Is that non-musical music? No, it's not. Mozart, sure. I want to dare anybody to tell me that Mozart is not musical,
right?
Or Rachmaninoff, it's unbelievably technical. And it's the most amazing music. And it's the same goes for modern music. Most people who criticize the technical aspect of modern drum set playing simply don't get it. That's the evolution. Then that's the future. Not going back to the past and simplifying things. No. It's the more tools we incorporate in our playing, and yes, those are techniques in on the drum set, these tools. The more artistic we can be, the more we can express ourselves in an innovative, new, modern, exciting way and play things that haven't been played before and express emotions in a different way. I've heard 2/4 all my fucking life. I'm so fucking bored of anybody who's out there playing 2/4. It's like, dude, really? How less exciting can drumming be than 2/4 backbeats? And I understand there's a history to it, and this is the norm, and this is where the backbeat should land, and fuck off.
Well,
as a creative person, I'm going, fuck, this is all bullshit.
And I've always had this thing where I've thought about it when I've read people in articles saying, less is more. Those are the guys that can't play more.
Yeah, I want to hear them say that about their bank account.
Right.
Because that's nonsense on every level.
Sure.
It's nonsense musically and in every other way.
So I get what you're saying, and my question really is a non-issue, because at the end of the day, it's really kind of like you're just giving someone an instruction manual on how to use tools.
Yeah.
It's not, you never said that it was about art or lack of art or...
It actually says techniques.
Right.
On the cover.
That's the
advanced
name.
Techniques and so on.
Sure. And I think this is what you said to the interviewer as well. My question, and I'm not really quite sure where it came from. I guess I was thinking more along the lines of, was it when you were in the midst of these projects where you were hyper-focused on telling people about tools?
Right.
If you also at the same time had some sort of project that you then had to, where you set your instructional stuff to the side and then you had to move on to something else.
Yes, I do this, yeah.
Was it hard to switch gears in your mind?
No, not at all, because they're two different things for me.
Sure.
It's like you
That
put
makes
on a hat and a pair of shoes. Two different items, two
Yeah.
different polar opposites of your body.
Okay.
And to me, making an instructional drum video is one thing, and then if I want to do something that is zero technical and a completely different frame of mind, I write. And I write, and I start with some chords and some bass lines and some lyrics, and I write a song, and I get that gratification from that aspect of my occupation. This satisfies all my musical needs, and of course the drumming too. But that's always secondary to me, playing drums, in terms of sort of an emotional creation or expressing a feeling or whatever. The drums I can do it on the drums too, But if I need that balance between being super technical and instructing people, I can't instruct anybody on the keyboard. There's people who, play a gazillion times better than me, or on the bass, But nobody can instruct me in terms of my emotional expression or my taste in songwriting or anything like that. So this is for me that perfect balance to the super sort of technical and instructional stuff. So I have that, another aspect of my, daily work as a musician anyways. And I get the perfect balance of yin and yang. And sometimes when I do too much of that instructional stuff or the technical drumming stuff, I play something that's super simple for a while, or I just don't play at all and I just write songs for a while. I produce somebody else's record, and that's how I personally get that balance in my life. And and this is also what always kind of makes me obviously reconsider both elements and both sides of what I do: the creative side and the quote unquote musical side, the artistic, emotional side of what I do as a writer and producer, but also as a drummer, and then the instructional side. Switching back and forth and having both elements always in my life and in my daily routines creates a great balance for me, and also is a reminder, and also kind of sharpens my sensitivity to obviously what other people think about what I do. Because when I then get those comments about, this is too technical, I'm like, yeah, you're wrong. It's not. There's no such thing as too technical. If there's no other way to play new things other than being more technical. That's why very few people play new things. I know one or two drummers in the world who can play something that I haven't heard before. Maybe one. You know what I mean?
Okay, this leads me to a question that somebody who knew I was doing this podcast said I had to ask you.
Okay.
It's not even written down here. So.
All right.
Okay, so yeah, you've seen a lot of drummers out there, and you possess this incredible level of skill, and you've dedicated yourself to it, to which most people don't have that level of dedication. Has there ever been a drummer who's played something where you thought, shit, I can't do that. I need to learn how to do that.
Of course.
No, and I don't mean like when you were coming up. I mean like now.
No.
Okay.
But all my life when it was coming up, of course.
Yeah, sure.
So I know exactly what that feels like, and I love that feeling.
Who was the last guy that you thought, shit, I can't do that. I gotta learn how?
Probably Vinny or something. Like, or maybe yeah, it must have been like 80s Vinny or Weckel or something, or Simon Phillips or Terry Bozzio or something like that,
Yeah.
But it's a long time ago, and I love that feeling. I love going to a show or a club gig or on YouTube or whatever, and seeing something where I go, huh? That's new. Wow. Because I love to create as a musician means, yes, to build something out of nothing, to create something, and the more innovative and new and radical and provocative it is, to me as an artist and musician, the more exciting. You get tired of eating pizza every day, I'm sure. Imagine you have to eat pizza every day, and then it's 2 years of just lasagna, and then it's 4.5 years of burgers, and that's what we have all the time in music and in drumming especially. I mean, there's been years and years of the same stuff. In metal, nothing has changed. I hear the same metal drumming today that I heard 10 years ago. And in R&B, it's the same thing. Nothing has changed. There's just new outfits that the drummers wear, you know what I mean? But the playing is all the same. Honestly, I mean, and this is not a critic, it's what it is, and people love it, great. You know, I love aspects of that too, absolutely. I think it's incredible, but it bores the shit out of me, you know, as a creative person, you know. And I'm not speaking as strictly as a drummer, but just as a creative person, I look at this and I go, this is great, but there's nothing new there, you know, and that's same goes for jazz, you know. And as a traditional, or as a musician who studied music and obviously studied music history, both jazz, you know, R&B, rock and roll, classical, and so on, I can totally appreciate the tribute to the musical history and the homage to those amazing musicians from the past and the styles and the perfect replication of that style and the perfect execution of, you know, whatever that swing pattern and so on, and the feel and the nuance. Totally love all that and can totally appreciate that. But I'm speaking as a creator and as an artist and as a creative person, as a writer, and somebody who wants art to inspire. And that's where I come around to your question. When was the last time you saw somebody where you went, ooh? That for me is an, you know, inspiring moment. When somebody plays something and I just either don't get it or I'm totally surprised. And the element of surprise is one of the most important things, I believe, in music or art in general. In a movie, you know, you want that suspense and then release, or some sort of surprise or twist at the end, you know. And that's what I like about drumming too. When I hear somebody who surprises me, and that's really hard to find because there's so much of the same stuff out there.
So, having had to play many styles over the years, in the various session work and gigs you've done, albums you played on, which style presented the biggest challenge in terms of making it sound and feel authentic, or as you've referred to before in an interview, idiomatically correct?
For me personally, well, many different sort of mondo styles, you know, various styles of ethnic music, whether it's Arabic music or Eastern European music or Latin music, for example. So to truly feel, you know, a samba or you know, a songo or bayon or is like, you know, Indian music, whatever it is, to truly feel it, you have to expose yourself to it for a long period of time. And those are for me personally, of course, the biggest challenges, you know. And I think for anybody, you know, if they're honest, if you want to play Indian music correctly, you got to go there and spend some time there and learn from somebody there and play with people there and grow up in the environment, understand the context. It's the same with salsa and Brazilian music or tango, you know, in Argentina, or, you know, faro or whatever style of music. And it's the same, it goes for Austrian folk music and American R&B. You got to go there and live there, experience it, you know, hear it a lot, play with musicians, talk about it. So those have, I think, for me personally, the biggest challenges. Not that I can't fake it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's part of being the pro.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
have to be able to jump in and give it your
best shot. As a session musician, I've often faked my way through various sort of world music styles. And I studied a lot of Latin music and Brazilian music, and, you know, I've done my homework as much as I can, but I've not, you know, I couldn't say that I've gone to India and lived there for a couple of years to really get into Indian music and learn konakol, and, you know, so, no, but that's something that, you know, I never had I was never interested in that either. I'm interested in Indian music superficially, and I'm interested in rhythmic structures and everything they use in the playing and drumming. I can play on the drums, so I've taken a lot of inspiration from it. But I never felt that I wanted to. And this is not a diss of Indian music at all. I could replace this with any other. This is just a variable. Like, let's call it world music. You know, It could be anything. I love Indian music, but let's call it, I don't know, Romanian folk songs or something. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've never traveled and lived in Romania for 2 years to study the music because it's not one of my priorities.
Sure. You've seen an incredible amount of changes in the drumming industry through the years. Companies that were once at the top, now relegated to a lower tier.
Mm-hmm.
Companies that were once on a companies that were on a much lower tier, now at the top or really close to it.
Yeah.
You've seen print fade, which personally makes me sad. We all
me
grew
too.
up with that. Yeah.
Me too.
You've seen socials rise.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen tiny hi-hats. You've seen big hi-hats.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen 20-inch rides now look like splash cymbals to you, and 24-inch rides become the norm, almost.
Yeah.
You've seen DVDs rule and then fade.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen a lot. So which changes have given you heart, and which do you think maybe weren't for the better?
I feel all change is good and acceptable. I have sentimental attachments to certain things like print. I still prefer to read paper books rather than on my Kindle or my computer or something. I prefer to be able to take the book and throw it in the sand on the beach and not worry about
Take it to the bathroom.
Yeah, take it to the bathroom, exactly. So I have certain preferences and sentimental attachments because of my age and how I sort of first experienced certain things and so on. But I think in general it's all good with me. All these changes are good, and we just have to adapt, and we have to learn to understand the necessity for the changes. Once you understand the reason and for the change, I'm not, paperless is good. It's good for the environment. So there's a reason where I can go, okay, I'm down with the Kindle. You know what I mean? So everything has a reason, and if the essence of the trigger to cause that change is something positive, I'm totally down. I'm down with electric cars and solar energy, and I'm down with all things that make the world a better place, a cleaner place. And in terms of our industry, if the new 24-inch, splash cymbal is the new rage simply because it inspires a generation of drummers to play a certain way, or play something different, and it brings a lot of revenue to simple manufacturers, and they experience growth as a result, or there's a buzz in the scene for some reason because somebody plays a 24-inch splash, let's call it, the cymbal, then that's all good and exciting and fun. We both know that a lot of these things are short-lived trends and fashions, and they'll go away, and eventually it all will circle back around, to 1973, and then we'll do another circle of 30, 40 years of rehashing the same concepts over and over again. I mean, it's just what it is. There are cycles, and occasionally, with every revolution of that big wheel that cycles around, it'll pick up a new piece of gum, which wasn't there before. And those are the things that I'm really interested in. Not the changes that are more short-lived, things. I think print is gone forever, for sure, and it'll not get better from here. There may be, but it'll I think it'll evolve into another separate scene of print and paperback book enthusiasts, just like there are vinyl enthusiasts now, and just like there are bootleg or cassette tape aficionados, you know what I mean? It creates its own scenes. And although the vinyl industry has been gone for so many years, it's experienced like a 600% growth in the last 2 years. And Jack White bought his own, built his own vinyl manufacturing facility, because there's a big scene now again of people, but it's a separate scene from the music scene. And I think all these changes are quite, they're fertilizing the fringe scenes, which is, I think, very good. And, when the 24-inch ride cymbal goes away, there'll be a few companies on the fringe scene who specialize on 24-inch ride cymbals, if you know what I mean. Because if you look at the manufacturing industry or the music industry, stylistically and so on, if you look at the fringe, what I'm always interested in, that's where the most exciting things are happening always, not in the mainstream middle of the road kind of stuff and the big trends that you see on social media and every posts about. It's the things that are a little tucked away and hidden away, and the fringe scenes that create really interesting products in terms of instruments or music, fashion, everything. So I think all changes are good if the reason behind them is a positive one. And I have no issue adapting at all. I find it actually very exciting, all these changes all the time.
So I had a question that I wanted to ask, and it was more, I wanted you to tell a story. Okay. So one of my favorite stories ever, you sat on a patio. It was you, me, I think Mike Dolbear was there. Okay. Possibly Norbert as well. And you were telling us this story, and you don't have to repeat this if you don't want. We'll edit this part out. But you told us this story about, I guess, being sort of a pseudo production manager for a friend of yours who had really deep pockets, was putting together an album for some artist, and this either deep pocket guy or the artist wanted Charlie Watts to play drums. Yeah. Have you told this story a lot? No. If you care to share, it's one of the best stories I've ever heard. Oh, okay. It had me dying. Right. Please share with our listeners about your experience with Charlie Watts. Okay. Absolutely. Well, I was involved in this production and organized for the co-producers and engineer from Europe to come over here to record here at Simon Phillips' studio, when it was still his old studio in LA, in Van Nuys. And the executive producer with very deep pockets of this album had a connection to Charlie Watts' wife. Shirley. Yeah, Shirley. Exactly. Yep. The equestrian connection, the horses. So he owed him, basically, because this guy was selling the horses for massive discounts to Shirley because he's a Rolling Stones fan. So he got kind of close with Charlie, and when he then funded this record, he said, I've got a connection to Charlie Watts. He could play on those two Motown-y songs. And, of course, the producers and everybody, and I'm like, yeah, of course. So it happened. And I organized all the musicians here for the session and booked the studio with Simon and everything. And then Charlie came, and I picked him up at the airport. And I have to say, I wasn't a big Rolling Stones fan. I was never I liked certain songs and albums, but I wasn't a hardcore Stones fan. And anyways, meeting Charlie completely changed that. And so wait, you picked him up at Tom Bradley Wing? I picked him up at Tom Bradley. He walks out of customs?
He walks out of customs.
Just with everybody else?
Totally traveled alone.
Sweet.
No bodyguards. He came and he carried his little bag, and this was after he had a long illness, and he hadn't played for like a year and a half. And he was quite weak, and this was in 2008 or 9. It's like 10 years ago. So he looked like an old man, and he was, after having gone through his long illness, he was weak, and this is the first time he played drums after a year and a half, 2 years. And he's not a session guy. It's not like Charlie Watts would show up at any session, play on any drum kit, and just do his thing. He's never done a session before, So to come somewhere completely, rusty, of course, after a couple of years, and then play a song he's never heard before, or let alone two, it's not the way Charlie Watts works or ever needed to work, He doesn't even have a driver's license. He had a chauffeur since he was 17, just to put it into perspective. Okay, yeah, so sure. There he is, he shows up, and we go out, and we come out of the, VIP area, and he walks straight to the first Rolls Royce that's parked there, of course.
Which you
and I'm like, sorry, Charlie. Yeah, it's that one over there.
Which I think at the time was like, what, a Volvo SUV or something like that?
No, I had like a really swank, like BMW, like
Okay.
X5 or something like that.
But he went for the Rolls Royce.
Of course.
Because everybody drives Rolls Royces, in Charlie Watts' world.
Yes, or Bentleys, and no, and it was actually like that. He went from the first Rolls, like I'm pointing over there, and he was walking over to the Bentley. I'm like, no, sorry, two more. But anyways, and of course doesn't buckle himself in the car. I put him in the front seat. It's me and Charlie Watts in the car, and he has like I said, he's had a chauffeur since he was 17, and he has like two, I think, Lagondas, the custom Aston Martin cars, where everything's custom made, every screw, pretty much. So he's used to saying, launch the Lagonda to his driver, and there he goes. And it's, of course, he's been driven around all his life, and sits in the back usually. And this was just a new experience, I think, for him and for me, of course. And there's in the front seat in LA, and I've got to tell Charlie West to buckle up. It's like, no, it's the thing on the left. You pull it around and put it in there, and he was not used to buckling himself into a car.
Did you have to buckle him in?
I had to buckle him in. But anyways, I mean, this sounds like he's some sort of, lives in a different reality, which yes, he does. But he's the most amazing guy, the sweetest person. What a gentleman. What a drum lover and nerd. Anyways, I take him to the hotel, and we have dinner, and we hang out, and the next day, and we organized exactly his spec kit, Gretsch kit, and we got Drum Paradise or somebody to bring it over, and Simon organized a take for him from the studio, and we had exactly his spec, fantastic, and we started playing him the song the next day. And he's getting on age-wise, and he's jet-lagged, and he hadn't played for 2 years, and this is all new. It's a new song, new kit, although it's exactly his spec and the vintage Gretsch and everything. It's all new. So, but he's doing what he does. He sits down and he sounds like Charlie Watts immediately, and it's amazing. And we take a lot of breaks, of course, and because it's a little bit of information, overload with the new songs and beats, and we're trying different things, and he's never done a session like that before, anyways. So it's all exciting and new for everybody. So we're taking a lot of breaks, and we're hearing a lot of stories. And after the session, I drive him to the hotel, and we hang out, and we have dinner. I pick him up. We have breakfast the next morning. We drive. We do the same thing again the next day. I drive him back. We have lunch. So we spend a lot of time together, just talking, lunches and dinners. And then he's done. We're done after a few days of drum recordings, 2-3 days or something, 3 or 4 maybe. And then I am, playing the rest of the record. So, and then there's Luis Conte coming, and Lee Sklar was doing bass on that session, and so we're now recording the rest of the songs in the same studio. And Charlie's supposed to go home. And he's asking, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? I'm like, well, I'm tracking drums tomorrow. And he's like, can I stay? Yeah, of course. No problem. Call the hotel, change the flight, boom. So he's staying another day, and he's just sitting around listening to me play the drums all day long, which was, amazing.
Yeah.
And then we're done, and he's asking, so what are you doing tomorrow? I'm like, tomorrow we're recording Luis Conte all day, and do you mind if I stay? No, of course. Changed flight. Okay, and there's Luis, and everybody's hanging out, and it goes on like that for a week or so, or almost a week, like 6-7 days. And then he's going, what are you doing tomorrow? I'm like, nothing. We're done. Do you mind if I stay? It's like, yes, absolutely. What do you want to do? It's like, I don't know, I'll just pick you up at breakfast, I'll think of something. So he stayed another day, and then said the same thing. I brought him home to my house.
This part's good.
Yeah,
Talk about this. So he shows up, he's at your house.
No, yes.
He said you bring him to your house.
Yeah.
And at one point you're doing something, and he's sitting in the kitchen eating fruit.
Yes, a banana.
And your wife walks in?
Yes.
She wasn't expecting this.
I brought him home. We were at DW. And on the way back, we just stopped at my house. And because he was into electronic drums, and we were talking about V drums, and I said, well, do you want to try my kit at home? And he's like, yeah, because he's a drum nerd, like we all are. And he has the most amazing collection of drums you can imagine. Anyways, but we stop over at my house, and I have to go to the bathroom. So, and he's in the kitchen and sitting on my kitchen island and asks if he may I have a banana. Of course, Charlie, may I have a banana. And he's sitting on my kitchen island and eating banana. And my wife comes home from like Ralph's or something.
And you're still in the bathroom.
I'm still in the bathroom.
Yeah. And
she walks into the kitchen with a stranger sitting on the kitchen island eating a banana. And she's outraged. You know my wife. She's like, who are you? Oh, I'm Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones. As I'm walking down the hallway, I hear my wife go, who are you? With like 7 shopping bags around him. Yeah. And he's like, I'm sorry, I'm Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones. He actually Charlie Watts would have been enough.
Right, sure. Yeah.
Anyways, but that was quite a surprise.
Well, wait.
And also,
okay.
Yeah, I think that same time he was here, I wanted to introduce my kids to Charlie Watts because
yeah, of course.
You gotta.
Right.
And they were really young. That was 10 years ago, And so I'm calling my kids, and one of my kids, Flynn, he comes and he meets, Charlie Watts to him, like, hi, some, grandpa, nice man. Hi, okay, and he goes and plays Lego again. And I'm calling my other boy, and he's not coming. And I'm like, okay, I want him to meet Charlie. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm calling down the hallway, hey, Lex, I want you to meet somebody. Nothing. And Charlie's waiting for him to come down the hallway. Nothing. Lex! And I hear down the hallway, I can't, I'm pooping. And Charlie said, oh, okay, it's all right. Anyways, but he was amazing with the kids. He played with them.
YouTube.
Yeah?
You were watching YouTube at one point.
Oh, yeah, we were.
No, wait, I don't want to interrupt. I didn't hear this part. I'm sorry. He was playing with your kids?
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
It is totally awesome. It is totally awesome. I mean, geez.
Now, you introduced him to YouTube.
Yeah, well, I think me and my wife, we were, chatting in the kitchen. And in the studio, actually, we were looking at something on YouTube. But he doesn't have a laptop, and he doesn't have a phone either. He doesn't have a wallet. He doesn't carry anything because it would bulge his pockets. He has a money clip and credit card in his, suit pocket, and that's it. And so he doesn't carry laptops around or anything like that. And so in the studio we were looking at something on the computer. I can't remember. Somebody was Googling something or YouTubing something, and Charlie was very interested looking at everything. And a few days later when we were here, we had the laptop on the kitchen island, and we're chatting with Charlie, and Elizabeth is... We're talking about something about early Stones and stuff, and Elizabeth, and he goes, what's this? How do you find something on this thing? And she shows him on YouTube how to search for something, and she goes, let's look, put in Charlie Watts, see what comes up. Of course there's 17 gazillion results, and we click on the first one. It's an interview with Brian Jones and Charlie, from like 1967 or something, black and white BBC interview, and we click on it in full screen, and he became very emotional, of course, because it was something he'd never seen before himself, some black and white footage from the BBC, which was only aired once, and somebody from some archive put it, digitized it and put it on YouTube, but he'd never seen it, because he missed that one early broadcast in 1967, and there it was gone. It didn't happen again, and suddenly this thing appears in his life again after all these decades, and his good buddy is in it, as a young man, and he became super emotional, which was very touching for me and Elizabeth, because we felt really bad, because we didn't want to make him sit there and cry over, something like that. And at the same time, we were like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, obviously, it meant so much to him, and then he was totally on board, and he was Googling Sid Catlett and like early drummers, Baby Dodds, and all the people that inspired him, and we spent hours just finding stuff online.
God, how cool.
Like videos of Baby Dodds, and I mean early drum heroes of his, and whatever was available. It was amazing. Yeah.
All right, so the finale to the story is when you checked him out of the hotel.
Oh, yes. It was he didn't have a mobile phone, a cell phone. I mentioned that, right?
Right. You said didn't carry anything.
No, and the bill was immense, of course, because it was a very swank hotel in LA, first of all, and of course the period of time much longer than we had planned initially, and also he is old school. When he wants to make a phone call, he'll pick up the hotel phone and dial the number outside the line, and then dial England and whatever.
In England.
Yes.
From America.
From America. And then just chat on the hotel phone. And since the early days of mobile phones, I think everybody has stopped using hotel phones because we all know how expensive those are. But I think, we were talking about a different reality earlier, and of course that's, for Charlie, he lives in a different reality. He'll have somebody make a phone call on the cell phone or pass him a cell phone if he needs one. But in the hotel, there just happens to be nobody around, but there's a phone, a landline, and then you just pick up, dial outside line, and call England. And then you just leave the phone off the hook, just in case you want to say something again later. You just keep the line open at all times. Even when the conversation is really over, to his, wife, or
just put it on speaker.
Just put it on speaker and leave it there. And that's what happened, of course.
2 days went into 3 days,
and
went into 4
7
days.
and 9 and whatever. So, yeah, it was. I don't remember exactly. I think it was $12,000 for the phone bill.
And did you ask him, like, hey, Charlie, what's this about? Did he just...
No.
No, you just said, you knew.
No, I didn't.
Oh. You just paid it and moved on?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
I've
never forgotten this whole story.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I didn't know that Lex or Flynn had to tell him that they were pooping. I didn't know that part of it.
It was Lex. That was hilarious. But he was such a gent and such a amazing human being, and such a gentleman, and the stories he told, and not just Rolling Stone stories where you go la 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 la. I don't need to. Okay, I just started liking the Stones. Please don't finish the story.
Yeah, sure.
But amazing stories, funny stories, really sweet, emotional stories, and stories that are just like straight out of the rock and roll, the madness almanac, crazy stuff, amazing. And when you hear it, from the horse's mouth, it has a very different impact. When you hear something like, yeah, I was there, I was standing right next to him when it happened, and yeah, I actually said that to him, and like, yeah, I read those quotes, I know, I remember.
Wow.
It's amazing. So that was an amazing experience, and I learned to love his playing. Like I said, I was never a huge fan, because for me, in the early days, of growing up, learning to love music, of course the drumming was important to me. That has changed now. Now it's not so important anymore. I listen more to the song or the structure, the writing or the lyrics, whatever. But in the early days, I liked music that had cool drumming in it, and I never thought that his drumming was all that amazing or exciting, And then I went through periods where I really learned to appreciate his feel, and then I paid no more attention to it. But then meeting him and spending time with him and hearing him, and especially then editing all his recordings, the tracks he played on, I did the editing on it. That was really amazing, because that Charlie does the thing where he lifts his right hand off the hi-hat when he plays the backbeat. He plays right, left, right, left. Never both hands at the same time on the backbeat. He also does it on the right cymbal, which is really interesting, which exposes the snare drum. So there's never a cymbal sound on top of the snare drum. You have this completely isolated snare always on the backbeat, without that little, cymbal, sound layered on the hi-hat, which makes the snare just sound cleaner and crisp, and this is more exposed. And also it delays his backbeat a tiny bit, but very consistently. And he leads very strongly with his right hand all the time when he plays fills, and he plays these little buzz rolls with the left hand always. You know, if you know that typical like you know, that's such a Charlie thing. There's little you know, buzz rolls on the left hand, and everything's really just 8 notes, you know, with the right hand. And the right is always a little bit louder than the left, and it never, even when he plays, it's always you know.
For anybody out there that doesn't know Charlie's playing and they want to hear exactly what Thomas is talking about, like with the buzzes, you know, and they listen to the song "Can't You Hear Me Knocking."
Right.
That is perfect example.
Exactly.
So, sorry, keep going.
Anyways, so it was really interesting to analyze his playing and then put that into context with his personality and all the stories that I've had just heard and everything I'd learned about him, and it turned me to a huge fan.
You know, this is going to sound funny, but it's kind of like when, say, you meet whomever it is you're attracted to. You know, maybe there's someone you don't think you're attracted to, but then as you get to know their personality, suddenly they become better looking to you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's the same kind of thing.
It was exactly that, and I mean, I felt like a fool, you know, because I'd been so narrow-minded, you know, and it's like I just shrugged it off as like, yeah, Stones, were never my thing, you know. It just again was a reminder, you know, and a lesson in that you got to keep an open mind, and you shut up if you don't know shit, you know what I mean? Right. And I didn't really, so that was really an important lesson. Suddenly I found out so much, and then did a little more and started reading, you know, Keith's book and Mick Jagger's book and so on. And so I put everything together a little bit, listened to some of the old records again, and like, wow, yeah. I kind of missed that train there for a long time, you know.
Yeah, that's cool.
But,
thank you for sharing that story.
Oh, sure.
So we've been at it for a while, so I'm going to wrap this up here, but I've got one last question for you. I'm very curious after spending time with you and talking to you, picking your brain about things, what books or podcasts, if either, and if you don't read and you don't listen to podcasts, that's fine too. We'll edit the question out. But what books or podcasts are you currently into, or maybe you've read one book a year ago and it's still impacting you today? Anything you'd recommend for anybody to check out, or recommend for me to check out?
Yeah, you know, podcasts, I don't really listen to podcasts, to be honest. My wife does all the time, so I listen to what she listens to. The only podcasts I don't listen to podcasts. I listen to disco music. Like, I mean, seriously, like on iTunes, or when you have the options, like on iTunes or in the car or something, to if it says library, store, whatever, and I go to store and I go to podcast, see what's available, I go straight to the 70s music disco.
Okay, that's
offerings.
my question, like K-Tel Presents, that kind
Totally.
of thing. Okay, got it.
And, you know, and the car, there's so many, I have satellite radio in the car, and there's so many hundreds of stations, and I go straight to like channel 50, which is the groove, of course, or 70s on 7, you know,
yeah, sure.
or soft yacht rock, you know,
Lord.
like totally Baker Street and stuff, you know.
That's
no,
funny.
I'm so lame in that respect. I listen to the news, but not really to podcasts, and I feel bad about that, and I have to learn more about it.
Don't feel bad. Everything in your own time.
Yeah,
Just like the Stones.
I don't even listen to much. Actually, just the other day, I looked at some videos, like drummer interviews. Like, I forget what the website was or anything, but I found it very interesting. So I don't listen enough to podcasts. I'll make an effort to do more.
I bet you'll listen to this one.
Once, probably, yes. Yeah. Just to make sure there's no crackling or hissing going on. No, of course, no, I'll listen to this. And
books?
And books. Wow. You know, I read quite a bit. So the last... Well, it wasn't the last one. Any book, you mean?
Anything that still keeps...
Why Geography Matters is the book I'm currently reading.
Ah.
Yeah, check it out.
Okay.
It's called Why Geography Matters.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't know much about geography.
Right.
And I find that insane. It's like not owning or knowing your backyard. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like geography has so much impact on politics industry.
That's why
economy.
they call it geopolitics.
Yes.
Right.
And to understand how geography affects our daily lives, I think will make you, reconsider many things in life. I travel a lot, so do you. Most people who travel, I know so many musicians who travel all over the world, they have no idea where they are. And not only politically, which country they're in, or what the political structure or government structure in that country is, but also they have no idea about the geography of that place. And if you know about geography, if the country of Ecuador is called Ecuador because it's on the equator, you go, duh, you know what I mean? Mm. Most people go, oh, really? So what do you think happens on the equator? Well, it's 6 hours, 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night. 6 a.m. sunrise, 6 p.m. sunset. You know a lot of things already about the country of Ecuador if you know the geography.
That's interesting. I mean? Just the other day, I was quizzing my daughter on a test she had coming up, and she was having to learn the Central Powers, the Allied Powers, and the Neutral Powers in World War I.
Right.
And she looked at Switzerland in the middle of this map, and she'd had it colored the color of a neutral power.
Right.
And she said, well, why in the world would that country be neutral if it's in the middle of all that fighting?
Right.
And I asked her, I was kind of like, okay, it's like a natural fortress.
Right.
And I'm telling her the whole thing, and once she got it, it didn't take much.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Yeah.
Why geography matters.
Why geography matters. That's a great book. And I'm a geography, and I'm a bit of a science nerd, and I always loved geography and physics. It'll help you put everything into context: politics, history, trade, geography, economy. Everything. It's cool.
Thomas, thank you so much. This was fun, man. I always love getting to sit around and just shoot the breeze with you. I learn a lot.
Thank you. And I as well. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.